This week, I decided I needed to improve my art as much as physically possible. All my favorite artists attended art school: Loish, Chris Hong, Jess Karp, Sketches of Shay, and even Masters of Illustration like JC Leindecker and Norman Rockwell. I always wanted to go to art school until I saw the price tags of my dream schools, and I'm not gonna do that. I have watched enough art school videos to know that the first year is about mastering the fundamentals. So I'm going to try to cram all of that into 1 week. As much as I'd like to master all the skills in 7 days, that's just not realistic. So instead, I want to become at least comfortable enough with each area that I don't avoid practicing them anymore. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to still try to advance my skills as fast as physically possible, without burning myself out. But who am I kidding? I probably will. I've accepted it and I'm ready. So let's talk about what I planned for this week. I've got a list of 5 fundamentals. The first one is form. Form is the most underrated fundamental. It's important if you want your work to look like it has depth. This is the first pillar in learning how to draw anything. You study form by starting with planes in perspective, and then you can move on to simple shapes, more complex shapes, and eventually more complex things like drawing people, animals, and buildings. Our second one is anatomy. This one is a bit more obvious in just learning how to draw people more accurately, understanding the composition of the body and how it works together. In art school, they teach anatomy by teaching bones, muscles, and by doing an insane amount of figure studies. I'll also be working on a lot of portraits because I feel like my illustrations really suffer from me not knowing how to structure the face. The third one is perspective. Perspective is also a little bit obvious in learning how to construct a background to be visually pleasing. A lot can be learned about perspective by practicing form. However, learning to draw various environments from life is a great way to practice. There are 5 types of perspective, and they are all useful for different things. The fourth one is composition. Composition is more abstract because while there are a lot of tools to help, it's not as obvious as the other fundamentals. I think this one is more about aesthetics, or conveying a story in a way viewers can easily understand. This is more about knowing what you want to say and knowing how to say it. The best way to study composition are by learning the basic tools, practicing building compositions using those tools, and studying how other people use them. Movie scenes are a great way to get started. You'll then want to start practicing thumbnailing more compositions when you have an idea for an artwork. And the fifth and final one is value and light. Value and light is part of composition in my opinion, but I did want to spend time working on this one specifically because it is crucial to the readability of your work. Value can be practiced in all of the above study methods. You can start with any of these methods and use value grouping to start. That's just leaving all the light areas white and lumping all of the dark areas into one. It's a 2-value scale. And then you can work your way up into a 3-value scale, a 4-value scale, a 5-value scale, and usually between 4 and 5 values is the sweet spot for most artists. You can, of course, go up from there. This is a rather basic overview, but to keep this video short, I'll make individual videos about each of these in the future once I'm a bit more experienced. And I have a couple things outside of that I want to work on. The first one being creativity. Creativity is more difficult than it has ever been. We have distractions everywhere we look. And the driving force for creativity is exposing yourself to a lot of new things, allowing yourself to be bored, and spending time thinking about your new ideas. Sparking your creativity is really hard if we are always watching videos or distracting ourselves with background noise. Reading books, having no experiences, meditation, and just sitting in silence are great ways to give yourself the breathing room to be creative. Then you can foster it by practicing. This can be as simple as sitting down and coming up with a bunch of ideas. The second thing that I want to work on outside the fundamentals is watercolor style. I have been really struggling to know how or when to render parts of my illustration. It's been frustrating to come out with pieces that have parts I love and parts I hate. And while I have been trying to figure this out already, the studies and values that I mentioned before are going to help the most with understanding the shading. I have also been learning the flaws in my work. I talked about this a little bit in last week's video. So now let's talk about this week. And it was a roller coaster because of this challenge. On Sunday, we started off simple with some portraits. Like I said before, faces have been a bit of a problem area in my illustrations, so this felt like the best place to start. 3 of the 10 turned out really well. I experimented with a couple of sketching methods because I really didn't want to use pencil. I didn't want the pages to get super smudged and hard to see at the end, although I do use a little bit of pencil later on. I've also heard over and over again from artists online how your lack of skills can really come out when you use pen, since you can't erase and you have to work with every mark that you make. I really loved using my micron markers that I don't hardly use anymore, so I used them for the vast majority of this challenge. I went to do 5-figure studies trying other pens, but microns still are the best option for me. I watched a couple of videos to refresh myself on the types of perspective and some basic composition tools. This next part was one of the most tedious things I decided to do, and that was to study the skeleton. I started with the body, then the foot, hand, and skull. To be honest, I haven't used much of this knowledge looking back at it. However, the process of drawing it made me realize where I was wrong about a lot of anatomy. The last thing I did on Sunday was form practice. I found a broken draw on YouTube and went down a rabbit hole of exploring form. So when I was filming and editing for Monday, I realized that I completely forgot to mention this painting that I did. At the end of Sunday night, I sketched out this little character in pen and I immediately fell in love with it. I wanted it to be my little icon for my YouTube channel, so I wanted to paint it, and when I sat down to paint it, this is when I had a pretty good indication of where my watercolor skills were at. I am really struggling to figure out what kind of rendering process and style that I want. The biggest flaw in a lot of my watercolor illustrations is getting the right values. I have a really hard time making sure that there is enough depth and dimension to my characters, and I think that a lot of my studies towards the end of this week have helped with that a lot, especially when I sat down to do some Chris Hong studies. So it's going to be a little bit repetitive, but I paint this painting 2 more times. This one turns out okay. It's not bad, but it's not to the level that I want it to be at. The second one that I show you later on, I don't show you the whole process because it is a little bit repetitive, but I did learn a lot from doing that one as well. I really learned how much of the different tones that I wanted to include. So I decided to do a third one at the very end after this week that I will show you guys at the end. And that one I applied all of the skills that I learned over this week. And I really liked how I had an illustration from the beginning of the same thing, so that way I could show you the comparison of my skill improvement over this week. I think it's pretty obvious, but I hope that you guys see the improvement as well, and I hope that you enjoy this little quiet moment because this video is pretty fast-paced. And if you don't want to sit throughout this little chill bit, then I will put a timestamp on screen for you to skip to if you wanted to get back to the rest of the week. On Monday, I started off with more form studies, and this is when I realized how important they were and how bad I actually was at it. Then I moved on to some portraits, and they came out really well. Not perfect, but I learned a lot. My favorite one to draw was the older guy on the bottom left. While I drew him, I was reminded of a video or podcast or something where I heard that as you age and wrinkle, you will wrinkle most based on the emotions that you express. So all I could think about was how to best convey what I could assume from that. And I really focused on the wrinkles that best told that. The space between the eyebrows were particularly noticeable, so I assumed he faced a lot of anger and frustration. But there were also crow's feet outside of his eyes and tons of smile lines framing his mouth, so we can assume he had a lot of joy in his life as well. That was really fun to think about and helped me feel more inclined to observe the reference photo carefully. I did a couple block constructions of the body, then 2 more figure studies. I have consistently struggled with drawing faces in my figure studies, so I have been back and forth about attempting to work with that throughout the challenge. I did 2 more portraits, then drew some facial features and attempted to break them down into forms. Then, as much as I didn't want to after drawing the skeleton the day before, I sat down to learn all of the muscles. I was more intentional with making this one a little goofy looking, but the purpose of these wasn't for me to worry about the accuracy, but rather focus on the shapes and how they connected together. I did a couple of bad character drawings as I was getting really tired. I copied down compositions from some pieces I liked on Pinterest and then tried to find the composition direction with them. I did some cat studies to try to ease into drawing animals, but it was really upsetting because I couldn't figure out how to break them down into simple forms. I went on to the next page to attempt that more with different animals, and it really wasn't working for me. Next, I took some notes on practicing backgrounds and perspective, and then thumbnailed a cover for a comic idea that's been stuck in my head. On Tuesday, I came in with some figure studies and attempted to include the face more. Then I went on to practice forms and backgrounds upside down, give up, and try drawing cats again. This time it was with my own reference pictures of my cat. Some are a little bit wonky, but I started to understand the form and shapes. My biggest takeaway was that circles suck. They don't help with understanding form, not nearly as much as blocks. I tried to do another portrait, but it didn't turn out very well. Tuesday was sparse because we had a dinner to attend, and I also spent the morning doing my nails. This day wasn't the most packed with learning, but it was valuable since I finally had a breakthrough with drawing cats. On Wednesday, I explored more compositions by watching videos and practiced a couple ideas using them. I did a couple animal studies after that. Then I filled an entire sketchbook with notes on composition and storytelling from the Artist's Master Series book, Composition and Narrative. It gave me a lot to think about when it comes to focusing on storytelling in my work. I drew some circles and lines on the next page to attempt to work on my line quality. I don't know that it helped. I was worried that all my sketches were too scribbly. I did some 30-second shapes from still life using lineofaction.com, and then I moved on to some 1-minute ones for a little bit. That night, I thumbnailed out some composition scenes from Kung Fu Panda, did a couple studies beneath that, and then did a life drawing of my living space in front of me on the next page. It looks really weird, but the perspective was so hard. I tried to consistently remind myself of a 5-point perspective, but that didn't really help. I definitely need a lot more practice with this in the future. I wanted to do a lot more of these throughout the challenge, but unfortunately this is the only one that I did. I do want to go around at some point and draw every room in my house. I finished off the day with some George Bridgman studies just before bed. His shapes and construction are so incredible to observe. Looking back on Wednesday, I'm very surprised by how much I got done. I spent a lot of time editing, some time crocheting, and a whole day feeling rather defeated. On Thursday, I started off with 2 figure drawings and 2 portraits. I really took my time with these, and I think this is a great page to show how much I've grown. My first figure study had a lot of issues, but in the second one, I was very deliberate about not repeating the same mistakes. After that, I was learning from Tick McBurn on YouTube. I hope I said that correctly. I was watching many of his videos about thumbnailing and playing with your ideas. I started off Friday with 24 gesture studies. When I was done, I kept looking at them, wondering if this is how I should have done them, if I had done them wrong, or if I should find some guidance on how to do them properly. Normally they are about flow and movement, but I was focusing on practicing the construction I learned from George Bridgman, and also taking liberties to what made the most sense to me. I only did them for 30 seconds, so it was very fast-paced, and I barely had enough time to get them down. I moved on to form once again. It's so boring to study, but it can also be really challenging for the areas I fall short. Then I decided to practice my watercolor ideas. I had a lot of ideas on how to fix the methods I was using before, and I dove into painting really optimistically, but that very quickly turned into anger and I just felt hopeless. I took a break to process all that and came back feeling really anxious about this challenge. Today was the second to last day and I didn't feel like I'd improved enough. I jumped into 18 animal gesture drawings. They're not very pretty, but animal anatomy was starting to make sense more than just cats. I finished up the night with some thumbnails of landscapes. The last day was Saturday. Saturday was the day of my boyfriend's birthday party and I was making the cake, so I didn't expect myself to do much. However, this was the final day, so the pressure was on. I began with some Chris Hong studies. She did a live stream that day, and while I didn't get to watch and paint while she was live, I was able to watch it afterward. I kind of followed her process and tried to learn from it. I really love the rainbow colorfulness of her portraits. I ultimately need to practice more with watercolor, so I did 2 studies on my own trying to follow her process that came out pretty rough. They were both fun to do, but I definitely overdid it. I tried to do some animal studies, but I had run out of energy. I was so ridiculously tired. I wanted so badly to finish off strong, but I wasn't able to. I had a lot of feelings of disappointment in myself, a lot of stress and jealousy of others. But I also had a lot of breakthroughs and moments of clarity where you can see in my work that it finally clicked in my brain. A big thing that I learned from drawing from reference was that my observation skills suck. So that's something that I definitely need to focus on working on moving forward. I think the sweet spot for me is to fill one of these larger pages with studies. On the days I didn't want to even sit down and draw, I managed to at least get that first page done. But when I was exhausted, pushing past that was really hard. There were so many exercises I wanted to practice and never got to. I'm still going to continue to learn and grow. Coming out of this, I'm feeling more confident in my skills and more comfortable with stepping outside of my comfort zone. With everything I worked on, I feel like I have a better grasp on all of the fundamentals. I haven't drawn this much since I was a kid, so it was really refreshing despite how much work it was. It was a very long and stressful challenge, but I'm really glad I dedicated this week to study art and improve my craft. I'm really excited to see how this shows up in my illustrations. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.